This is chapter one, and as you can see, it's environmental problems, their causes, and sustainability. In this chapter, some of the questions or ideas we're going to be looking at is, as you can see on there, the big overriding principle is sustainable society, sustainability. Some of the things we'll be looking at are population growth, consumption, economic growth. Can we balance that out as far as economic growth versus ecological sustainability? And poverty, affluence. What's the difference between people that have money and their influences on the environment and people that don't? And how do they affect the environment? Later on, we'll look at some principles of sustainability and how people have changed in their relationship to the environment throughout time. Looking at this graph here, I think it has a really nice effect when we really kind of focus on, get my pen going here. When we look at this area here, obviously, it's a pretty substantial change here. Going back to the beginning of time, people started moving around. Not a whole lot of change until you got to about 1850 or so. Yeah, you got this Black Plague thing here. We'll talk about that some other time. But in about 1850 or so, we had an industrial revolution, and that really allowed us to take off our population. So we're kind of climbing this roller coaster ride here, and we're trying to figure out, where does it end? Where do we plateau? Does something else go on here? It's an important idea. It's an important concept that we're trying to figure out. Get rid of that. Sustainability, again, if we look at the Earth in general, we kind of see how everything is interconnected. We have water, we have air, life, and rocks. All these things are interdependent upon each other. If I change the air quality, anything about it, that is going to have an effect on the water. It's going to have an effect on the life in the water or air and everything else around it. If we take this one portion, life, and bring it over into this side, we can see how our population size, is determined or affects political decisions, our worldview as far as why our population is such, or why it's limited to a certain number, and how economics is related to those. So we kind of see how these are all interconnected. So environmental science, what is it? What are we trying to do? Well, we're looking at how nature works and really the relationship between living and non-living things and everything that's out there, not just humans, but everything that's out there. We look at how that environment, everything, affects us as human beings or any other target organism we want to talk about, and just the opposite, how we, in turn, pretty much humans, are affecting the environment that we live in. And then lastly, looking at the whole picture, how can we stay and live in this environment sustainably without any potential harm to the environment, which ultimately comes back and haunts us. Now, this little pictorial just kind of shows as far as some decisions along the way. We have natural capital, which is natural resources, and what we may have done in the past, and what are some decisions that we could make today using sound science, not just what we may like without any um, science behind it. I'm having a hard time getting around that. We have to make good decisions based on science. So, population growth, economic development, how do these things develop? Well, I mentioned before, that we always have this a little bit of a back and forth between the economy and the ecology or the environment. Just that trying to balance those two out so both can go in a positive direction. For you as an individual or an entrepreneur going off into the business world someday, if you can get a positive out of both of those, good for the economy, good for the environment, you will make a lot of money. So that is something to think about for the future. Outlooks. This is a really good pictorial as far as making the comparison between populations. You have the developed world and the developing world. And notice what a small percentage of the world's population that we belong to. We are part of the developed world. And the population growth, which we make a comparison, we're fairly flat. It is going up a little bit, but not a whole lot. This has gone down more recently, but it is still a significant number that is having an effect on total numbers population. But you see this inverse here as far as our low population having the majority of the wealth, majority of the resource use, and the pollution. The potential problem in the future is as the developing countries start to come more and more online, there really isn't enough resources to have them as well as us using these. So that is creating an environmental problem or will create an environmental problem in the future. And this is just another pictorial as far as locations of the world that have those resources and use. So the redder the area you see on the graph, the more poverty you're seeing. So resource use, you have things that are perpetually available, water and air, for the most part, are always going to be there. Water is something we can actually put more so into the renewable category as long as we use it sustainably. Things like wood would be something that would be a sustainable product, so we have to balance out how we're using that. And then you have things that are non-renewable, which would be things like metals or minerals, uh, fossil fuels. These things, once we use them, they're gone for our use. Maybe thousands, millions of years later, you'll have more around. But for our use, we have to make sure that we are careful in their use. And we got a nice little picture here of some little guy recycling some glass bottles. You can insert your own joke there. Another nice little graphic here, a couple graphics actually, is looking at footprints. So here we have our United States looking at just these 5 countries here: US, the European Union, the bunch of countries over there, China, India, and Japan as far as our ecological footprint. And we have quite, whoops, let me back up here. We have quite the impact. This is about 75% if we do the math and add all these guys up. 75% of the footprint is used by just those 5 countries. And then the rest of the world is in that bottom 25% of use. And if you look at the footprint per person, so in the United States, we have the equivalent of about 9.7 hectares per person in comparison to all these other countries. So just a nice little comparison there. We have quite a footprint, people in the United States. Looking at this graphic over here on the right, well, there's one Earth, as far as I know. And for years and years and years, we've been way below this line. Right about 1984 or so, we kind of start using more resources than our one Earth can provide, which is fine for now until we have overused such resources that that one Earth no longer has any resources. So ideally, we stay below this line permanently so the Earth can regenerate renewable resources and such. But that's not a perfect answer, but it's where we do need to kind of find ourselves. Well, this is a fairly good spot to take a break. We will pick up the second part of the lecture here in just a few minutes.